The flashing red and blue lights in the rearview mirror were supposed to mean safety, but for Lena Harper and her two children, they signaled the beginning of a nightmare. Trapped on an isolated suburban road by an officer who saw their skin color before he saw their humanity, they thought they were entirely alone. What that officer didn't know was that the husband Lena had just secretly speed-dialed wasn't an ordinary civilian. He was an active-duty Green Beret who had just returned home and was close by. The evening had started as a celebration. Lena Harper gripped the leather steering wheel of her brand-new SUV, a soft smile playing on her lips as she glanced in the rearview mirror. In the back seat, her 8-year-old daughter Lila was fast asleep, her small head resting against a stuffed bear. In the passenger seat sat her 16-year-old son Caleb, holding a thick envelope from the state's most prestigious STEM academy. He had been accepted into their advanced robotics summer program, a dream he had been working toward for years. To celebrate, Lena had taken them to a high-end steakhouse in the affluent, quiet neighborhood of Crestview Hills, a sprawling suburb characterized by manicured lawns, towering oak trees, and wrought-iron street lamps. It was the kind of neighborhood the Harper family was looking to move into soon. "I still can't believe I got in, Mom," Caleb said, tracing the gold foil seal on the envelope. "They only take a small number of kids in the whole state." "Believe it, sweetheart," Lena replied, her heart swelling with pride. "You earned every bit of it." The streets of Crestview Hills were practically deserted. The large houses set back from the road, bathed in the soft glow of security lights. Lena turned onto Oakbridge Lane, the main thoroughfare leading back toward the highway. That was when the headlights appeared. At first, it was just a set of bright halogen bulbs tailing them at a distance. Lena didn't think much of it, maintaining the strict speed limit. But as she merged into the right lane, the headlights mirrored her movement. She slowed down slightly, expecting the car to pass. It didn't. It matched her speed, lingering in her blind spot like a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. Caleb shifted in his seat, the rustling of his envelope suddenly loud in the quiet cabin. "Mom, that car has been following us for a while." Lena glanced in the side mirror. The silhouette of a police cruiser was unmistakable. A cold, heavy knot formed in the pit of her stomach. She hadn't been speeding. She hadn't swerved. Her registration was up to date, and the dealer tags on her new car were clearly visible. "It's fine, Caleb," Lena said, though her voice betrayed a slight tremor. "We haven't done anything wrong. He's probably just running plates." But a few seconds later, the darkness of the cabin was violently shattered by the strobe of red and blue lights. The sharp, authoritative chirp of the police siren cut through the quiet night. Leela jolted awake in the back seat, rubbing her eyes in confusion. "Mommy, are we in trouble?" "No, baby. Everything is fine. Just sit still," Lena said, taking a deep breath to steady her racing heart. She pulled the SUV smoothly onto the shoulder, parking beneath the glow of a street lamp. She shifted into park, turned off the engine, and rolled down all 4 windows, a habit ingrained in her by her father years ago. "Keep your hands visible. Turn on the dome light. Don't give them a reason to be nervous." Lena placed both hands firmly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. Caleb, mirroring his mother's caution, placed his hands flat on his thighs. In the side mirror, Lena watched the heavy door of the cruiser swing open. Officer Harlan Crow stepped out. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and heavy-set, moving with a slow, deliberate swagger that communicated absolute control. He rested his right hand casually over his utility belt, right near the grip of his firearm, as he approached the driver's side of the SUV. He didn't use a flashlight, stepping directly into the illumination of the street lamp overhead. "Evening," Officer Crow said, his voice a low, gravelly drawl. He didn't look at Lena immediately. Instead, he leaned down, sweeping his gaze across the pristine interior of the car, lingering on Caleb, and then on the sleeping child in the back. Finally, his eyes locked onto Lena's. There was a cold, calculating detachment in his stare. "Good evening, officer," Lena replied evenly. "Is there a problem?" Crow didn't answer right away. He tapped a thick finger against the doorframe of the SUV. "License, registration, and proof of insurance." "Of course," Lena said, her voice steady. My license is in my purse on the passenger floorboard. My registration and insurance are in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now." Crow's eyes narrowed slightly, as if irritated by her textbook compliance. "Go ahead." Slowly, Lena retrieved the documents and handed them over. Crow held the license up to the street lamp, studying her face, then looking back down at the plastic card. "Lena Harper," he read aloud, dragging out the syllables. He looked past her again, examining the dashboard. "Nice car. Brand new. You folks live around here?" The question wasn't a casual attempt at small talk. It was an interrogation. Crestview Hills was an exclusive zip code, overwhelmingly white and notoriously protective of its borders. "No, officer. We live in the city," Lena answered politely. "We were just having dinner at the steakhouse on the boulevard. We're heading home now." Crow smirked, a patronizing curve of his lips. "The steakhouse, right? Long way to come just for a steak. Whose vehicle is this?" Caleb stiffened in the passenger seat. Lena felt the shift in her son's posture and shot him a warning glance. "Stay quiet. It's my vehicle, officer. I purchased it a few days ago," Lena said, keeping her tone completely neutral. "Was I speeding? I'm not sure why I was pulled over." Crow leaned closer, his breath smelling faintly of stale coffee and peppermint. "Your vehicle matched the description of one involved in some recent burglaries in this neighborhood. A lot of residents have been complaining about suspicious individuals driving through late at night." Lena stared at him. A brand new SUV with dealer tags matches a burglary vehicle. "Burglars don't usually drive beaters around here, Mom. They try to blend in," Crow retorted, his tone hardening. He shifted his attention to Caleb. The teenager was glaring straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight. "What about you, son?" Crow asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Got some ID?" Caleb looked at the officer. "I'm 16. I don't have my driver's license yet." "I didn't ask if you could drive. I asked for ID. You got a school ID, state ID, anything that proves you are who you say you are." "He's a minor, officer," Lena interjected, her maternal instincts flaring. "He doesn't need to provide identification. We haven't committed a crime." Officer Crow's hand dropped fully onto the butt of his holster. The leather creaked loudly in the quiet night. "I'm conducting a lawful investigation into neighborhood burglaries, ma'am. Now, when I ask a passenger for identification, I expect to see it. Otherwise, I might start thinking he's got warrants. Or maybe he's hiding something." "I'm not hiding anything," Caleb snapped, his teenage pride momentarily overriding his mother's warnings. "We were just going home." Crow's eyes flashed with a sudden dark intensity. "What's your tone with me, boy? You think because you're sitting in a fancy car you can talk back to a police officer?" "Caleb, please just be quiet," Lena pleaded, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked back at Crow. "Officer, please. We have done nothing wrong. My son is just tired. Let me step out of the car and we can clear this up." "You stay exactly where you are," Crow commanded, pointing a thick finger in her face. "In fact, I think I need to have a little chat with the young man outside the vehicle. Passenger, step out of the car." Panic, cold and suffocating, seized Lena's chest. The traffic stop had just shifted from an uncomfortable case of racial profiling to an immediate physical threat against her child. "Officer, he is 16 years old," Lena protested, her voice rising in pitch. "He is a minor. You cannot pull him out of the car without cause." "I gave him a lawful order," Crow barked, his demeanor entirely hostile now. He stepped away from the driver's side and began walking around the front of the SUV toward the passenger door. "He is being uncooperative. That gives me probable cause to detain him for officer safety." In the back seat, Lila began to cry, her small shoulders shaking as the tension in the air became too much for her to process. "Mommy, what's happening? Why is he mad?" "It's okay, Lila, it's okay," Lena lied, unbuckling her own seatbelt. Caleb was frozen. The envelope from the STEM Academy had fallen to the floorboard, forgotten. He looked at his mother, his dark eyes wide with a mixture of defiance and absolute terror. He had seen the news. He knew the statistics. He knew exactly what could happen when a young black man was pulled out of a car on a dark road by an aggressive cop. The passenger door was violently yanked open. Crow stood there, filling the frame, Out of the car now, Crow ordered. I didn't do anything, Caleb said, his voice cracking slightly. Crow didn't wait for compliance. He reached in, grabbing Caleb by the fabric of his jacket, and hauled the teenager out of the seat. Caleb stumbled, his sneakers scraping against the asphalt as he was shoved roughly against the side of the SUV. The impact rattled the windows. "Hey, don't touch him!" Lena screamed, pushing her door open and jumping out into the cool night air. "Get back in the vehicle!" Crow roared, spinning around and pointing a finger squarely at Lena's chest. "You take one more step and I will arrest you for interfering with a police investigation, and social services will come pick up the little girl in the back." The threat hit Lena like a physical blow. She froze on the asphalt, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Please just listen to me. He's just a kid. He's on the honor roll. He got into a robotics program tonight. He's not a criminal." "Spread your legs," Crow ordered Caleb, ignoring Lena completely. He kicked Caleb's ankles apart, patting him down with unnecessary force. "You got any weapons on you? Any drugs?" "No," Caleb choked out, his face pressed against the cold metal of his mother's new car. "We'll see about that," Crow muttered. Finding nothing on the teenager's person, he grabbed Caleb by the back of the collar and shoved him toward the police cruiser. "Stand right there. Don't move a muscle." Crow turned back to the SUV, shining a heavy maglite flashlight into the passenger side, sweeping the beam over the glove box, the center console, and down onto the floorboards. "What are you doing?" Lena demanded, her fear beginning to give way to a fierce protective anger. "You don't have a warrant. You don't have my consent to search my car." "I have probable cause," Crow lied smoothly, the beam of his flashlight dancing over Caleb's fallen acceptance letter. "The passenger was acting nervous and belligerent. That gives me the right to conduct a visual sweep of the immediate area for contraband." Lena knew he was trying to provoke them. He wanted a reaction. He wanted Caleb to run, or Lena to attack him, giving him the justification to use the force he was so desperately itching to deploy. She took a slow, deep breath. Her mind raced, sifting through her options. She was a mother, a high school counselor, a woman who played by the rules her entire life. But none of those titles protected her here on this dark street. She needed the one person who knew exactly how to handle hostile threats. Slowly, deliberately, Lena slipped her left hand into the pocket of her cardigan. Her fingers found her smartphone. Without pulling it out, she pressed the power button 5 times in rapid succession, the emergency SOS shortcut she had set up months ago. It was programmed to silently bypass the lock screen, dial the first person on her emergency contact list, and keep the line open. The phone vibrated once against her hip. The call had connected. On the other end of that line was Master Sergeant Dominic Hale. "Please pick up, Dominic," she prayed silently. "Please look at this," Crow sneered, pulling his head out of the car. "I smell marijuana. I'm going to need to tear this car apart. And since you're so combative, ma'am, I'm going to need you in handcuffs." "Marijuana?" Lena scoffed, her voice shaking with disbelief. "Nobody in this family smokes. You are making this up." "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Crow ordered, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. The metallic clinking sound seemed deafening. By the cruiser, Caleb saw the handcuffs and broke. "Don't touch my mother!" he yelled, taking a step toward the officer. Crow whipped around, dropping his flashlight and unholstering his taser in one fluid, practiced motion. The red laser sight painted a dot squarely on Caleb's chest. "Take another step, boy, and I'll drop you right here," Crow screamed, his face flushed with adrenaline. "Get on the ground, face down, now." Lila was shrieking in the back seat, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror that tore at Lena's soul. Caleb, trembling with rage and fear, slowly lowered himself to the cold asphalt, interlacing his fingers behind his head. Lena stood paralyzed, tears streaming down her face, her hand still shoved deep in her pocket, gripping the phone. "Dominic," she thought, watching the red dot hover over her son's heart. "Please hear this. Please." A short distance away, heading northbound, a black heavy-duty pickup truck carved through the night. Behind the wheel sat Master Sergeant Dominic Hale. He had been driving for hours after a grueling deployment overseas. He was finally stateside. He had debriefed at the base, turned in his field gear, and thrown his duffel bags into the back of his truck. He hadn't told Lena or the kids he was coming home early. He wanted to surprise them. He wanted to walk through the front door, drop his bags, and wrap his arms around his family. Dominic was a Green Beret, a special forces operator who had spent his adult life in the most dangerous corners of the globe. He was trained to process chaos, to read human behavior, to neutralize threats with surgical precision. But right now, he was just a husband and a father, exhausted and eager for the smell of his own home. The Bluetooth system in his truck suddenly chimed, interrupting the low hum of the country radio station. The dashboard screen flashed. Incoming call, Lena SOS mode. Dominic's combat instincts, honed over years, triggered instantly. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a razor-sharp wave of adrenaline. Lena never used the SOS mode. They had agreed it was only for absolute life-threatening emergencies. He hit the answer button on the steering wheel. "Lena?" There was no direct reply. Instead, the cabin of his truck was instantly filled with the chaotic, horrifying audio of a nightmare unfolding. He didn't hear his wife's voice first. He heard a man screaming,
"Take another step, boy, and I'll drop you right here. Get on the ground. Face down now."
Then came the sound of a young girl crying hysterically, a sound that made Dominic's blood turn to ice. It was Lila. "Please, he's on the ground. Don't shoot him. Please, please." That was Lena, her voice raw, begging in a way Dominic had never heard before. Dominic didn't ask questions. He didn't yell into the phone. He knew instantly that his wife couldn't speak to him, that her phone was hidden. He was a silent listener to the assault on his family. He glanced at his GPS screen, tapping the family tracking app he kept synced with Lena's phone. A blue dot appeared on the map. Oakbridge Lane, Crestview Hills. It was a short distance from his current location. Dominic's foot slammed the accelerator to the floor. The heavy V8 engine of the pickup roared, the truck surging forward. He swerved violently across lanes, taking the Crestview Hills exit without hitting the brakes, the tires shrieking as they fought for traction on the curve. Through the speakers, the nightmare continued. "You people think you can come into this neighborhood and do whatever you want?" The aggressive, gravelly voice sneered. "Keep your face on the pavement, boy. And you, lady, turn around. Put your hands behind your back. You're both going in." "I have done nothing wrong," Lena sobbed. "I'm just trying to take my kids home." Dominic's face was a mask of cold, terrifying focus. His jaw was locked tight, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. In his mind, he was already running a tactical assessment of the situation. An officer was going rogue. A rogue actor with a badge, a gun, and absolute authority terrorizing his unarmed wife and children on a dark road. Dominic knew the statistics. He knew how quickly a bad traffic stop could turn into a tragedy. The man on the other end of the line wasn't acting like a peace officer. He was acting like a predator drunk on power. The truck blew through a red light at the intersection, the speedometer hovering high on the suburban road. Dominic rolled down his window, the night air whipping through the cabin as he strained to see ahead. A short distance down the road, he saw them, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the trees. Over the phone, Dominic heard the heavy clinking of metal handcuffs. "Stop resisting," the cop barked. "I'm not resisting. You're hurting my shoulder," Caleb cried out. Dominic's hands gripped the steering wheel so hard, his knuckles turned white. "Hold on, Caleb, Dad's here." Dominic didn't slow down to a crawl. He didn't pull up politely behind the cruiser. He drove his massive black pickup truck straight toward the scene, hitting the brakes hard at the last second. The truck screeched to a halt, the tires smoking, angling aggressively to block the street and bathing the entire scene in the blinding glare of his high beams. The sudden arrival of the massive truck startled Officer Crow. He dropped Caleb's arms, spinning around and raising his taser toward the blinding headlights, his other hand hovering over his sidearm. "Hey, back the vehicle up. This is a police scene," Crow bellowed, trying to sound authoritative. But Dominic could hear the sudden spike of uncertainty in the man's voice. Lena gasped, shielding her eyes from the headlights. Caleb looked up from the pavement. Dominic killed the engine. He didn't bother turning off the headlights. He pushed the heavy door of his truck open and stepped out into the light. He was still wearing his combat boots and his olive-drab tactical pants. A tight black fitted t-shirt stretched across his broad chest, revealing the thick, heavily muscled arms forged by years of carrying heavy rucksacks and pulling himself over walls. His posture was completely different from the panicked civilians Crow was used to bullying. Dominic didn't cower. He didn't raise his hands in fear. He walked with the terrifying, predatory stillness of a man who had survived firefights in hostile territory.
I said stay back,
Crow yelled, drawing his service weapon now, the heavy Glock pointing directly at Dominic.
Show me your hands.
Dominic stopped exactly 10 feet from the officer. He didn't look at the gun. He looked straight into Crow's eyes. Take your hand off your weapon, Dominic said. His voice wasn't a shout. It was low, quiet, and carried a frequency of absolute lethal authority that made the hairs on the back of Crow's neck stand up. And step away from my family.
Dominic!
Lena screamed, bursting into fresh tears, this time of overwhelming relief.
Dad!
Caleb scrambled to his knees. Crow looked wildly between the massive man in front of him and the family he had been tormenting. The power dynamic had violently shifted. Crow was used to fear. He thrived on it. But looking at the cold, dead-eyed stare of the man standing before him, Crow realized with a sickening drop in his stomach that this man wasn't afraid of his badge, and he certainly wasn't afraid of his gun. They are subjects in a criminal investigation, Crow stammered, trying to regain his footing, though the Glock in his hand trembled slightly.
You need to back off or I will drop you.
Dominic took one slow, deliberate step forward. The air around him seemed to crackle with violent intent. You pulled over a mother and her children, Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave, sounding like rocks grinding together. You forced a 16-year-old boy onto the pavement at gunpoint. You threatened to have child services take my 8-year-old daughter. Dominic took another step, closing the distance. Crow instinctively took a step back, his boots scuffing the asphalt. My name is Master Sergeant Dominic Hale, United States Army Special Forces, Dominic stated, his eyes boring holes into the terrified cop. I have spent the last deployment hunting actual predators in a war zone. I suggest you holster that weapon right now, before I show you the difference between a man who hides behind a badge and a man who actually knows how to fight. The silence on the road was absolute, save for the low hum of the police cruiser's engine and the distant rhythmic ticking of Dominic's overheated truck cooling in the night air. Officer Harlan Crow stood frozen, the Glock in his hand feeling heavier by the second. The man standing 10 feet away from him hadn't yelled. He hadn't made a sudden aggressive lunge. But the sheer gravitational pull of Dominic's presence, the predatory stillness of a Tier 1 military operator, was suffocating. Crow's mind, accustomed to the easy submission of frightened suburbanites, was short-circuiting.
I am giving you a lawful order,
Crow yelled, his voice cracking, the weapon trembling in his grip.
Get on the ground.
You're shaking, Crow, Dominic said, reading the officer's nameplate with chilling calmness. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't blink. Your heart rate is hovering around 150 beats per minute. You have tunnel vision. Your finger is twitching on the trigger guard. You're experiencing an adrenaline dump, and you have absolutely no control over this situation. Dominic took another slow, deliberate step forward, putting himself directly between the barrel of the gun and his son. Dad, please don't, Caleb whispered from the pavement, tears streaming down his face.
I've got you, Caleb.
Keep your head down, Dominic replied softly, without breaking eye contact with the officer. He shifted his attention back to Crow. Right now, you are aiming a loaded firearm at an unarmed United States serviceman who has just returned from an active combat zone. Behind me is a 16-year-old high school student who weighs 140 pounds. You have no probable cause. You have no warrant. And as of minutes ago, when my wife's emergency SOS app connected to my phone, this entire interaction has been recorded. Crow's eyes flicked to Lena, then back to Dominic. A flicker of profound doubt crossed his face. Every threat, Dominic continued, his voice echoing in the quiet street. Every time you unholstered your taser, every time you threatened to call Child Protective Services on a terrified 8-year-old girl, it's all on a secure cloud server. Now, the moment you pull that trigger, you aren't just committing murder. You are guaranteeing that you will spend the rest of your natural life in a federal penitentiary. Crow swallowed hard. The intoxicating rush of power he had felt minutes earlier had entirely evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. "Now," Dominic commanded, the authority in his voice leaving absolutely no room for debate. "You are going to slowly lower that weapon. Then you are going to use the radio on your left shoulder. You are going to call your watch commander, and you are going to ask for a supervisor to respond to this location immediately." For 3 agonizing seconds, neither man moved. The air was thick with the threat of violence. Dominic's muscles were coiled, his eyes tracking the micro-movements of Crow's right shoulder. If the officer's finger moved to the trigger, Dominic had already calculated the exact trajectory to close the distance, strip the weapon, and neutralize the threat before a round could clear the chamber. He didn't want to do it, but he would. Slowly, agonizingly, Crow lowered the gun. He didn't holster it, keeping it down at his side, but the immediate threat of a bullet tearing through Dominic's chest receded. With his left hand, Crow fumbled for the mic clipped to his shoulder. "Dispatch Unit 34, I have a 1033 on Oak Bridge Lane. I need backup and a supervisor at my location." "Copy 34. Units are en route." The dispatcher's voice crackled through the quiet night. "Good," Dominic said softly. He didn't move toward his family yet. He knew the danger wasn't over. A panicked cop was a dangerous cop, and backup was coming. Dominic turned his head slightly, speaking over his shoulder to his wife. "Lena, look at me," Dominic said. Lena looked up, her face pale in the harsh glare of the headlights. She was trembling violently. "I'm here, Lena. It's over. But I need you to listen to me," Dominic said, his tone shifting from the cold steel he used on Crow to the warm, steady anchor his wife knew so well. "When the other officers arrive, there is going to be a lot of yelling. Do not move. Keep your hands where they can see them. Caleb, stay exactly where you are. Do not give them a reason to panic." "Okay," Lena whispered, her voice breaking. "Dominic, I'm so scared." "I know, baby, I know. I love you, just hold on." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with terrifying speed. Within moments, the street was flooded with blinding lights. 3 police cruisers aggressively blocked the intersection, tires screeching on the asphalt. Doors flew open and half a dozen officers poured out, weapons drawn, shouting over one another in a chaotic chorus of commands. "Show me your hands. Get on the ground now. Drop the weapon." Dominic knew exactly what they saw. A massive, unidentified man in tactical gear, standing over an officer who had called a 1033, the code for an officer in immediate danger. Without hesitation, Dominic dropped to his knees. He laced his fingers behind his head, interlocking them tightly, and stared straight ahead. He made himself the perfect textbook-compliant subject. "I am unarmed," Dominic roared over the din of the sirens, his voice carrying the practiced projection of a battlefield commander. "I am the father of the children in that vehicle. The officer is standing down. Do not fire." 2 officers rushed Dominic, grabbing him roughly by the shoulders and shoving him face first onto the asphalt. Dominic didn't resist. He went limp, letting them push his face into the rough pavement, letting them pull his arms back and click a pair of heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. "Dad!" Caleb screamed, struggling to push himself up. "Stay down, Caleb," Dominic yelled from the ground. "Do not move." The chaos slowly crystallized into order as the officer secured the scene. Dominic was pulled to his feet, handcuffed, and leaned against the hood of one of the newly arrived cruisers. Lena was allowed to walk over to Caleb, throwing her arms around her son on the ground, weeping into his shoulder as an officer stood awkwardly nearby. A dark blue, unmarked SUV pulled up through the barricade of police cars. The doors opened and a tall, sharp-featured man with silver hair and a gold badge pinned to his belt stepped out. This was Sergeant Everett Lang, the watch commander for the Crestview Hills precinct. Lang took one look at the scene, the terrified mother and son clutching each other, the little girl crying in the back seat, the handcuffed man in military gear, and Officer Crow standing off to the side looking pale and sweating profusely.
What the hell is going on here?
Lang barked, walking straight toward Crow. You called at 10:33, Crow. I expected a shootout. I've got a crying family and a guy in handcuffs. Sergeant Crow started, his voice defensive and rushed. I conducted a lawful stop on a vehicle matching a burglary profile. The occupants were combative. The teenager refused to identify himself. The female driver attempted to exit the vehicle against orders. Then this man, he pointed a shaky finger at Dominic, arrived on the scene, blocked the roadway, and aggressively approached me. I had to draw my weapon to maintain control. Lang frowned, looking over at Dominic. He walked over, studying Dominic's calm, completely composed face. He noted the military boots, the olive-drab pants, the posture. Who are you? Lang asked. Master Sergeant Dominic Hale, United States Army, Dominic replied, his voice steady and polite. I just returned from a deployment. That is my wife, Lena. Those are my children, Caleb and Lila. And your officer is lying to you, Sergeant. Lang crossed his arms. Is that right? Sergeant Lang, isn't it? Dominic asked, reading the name tag. I understand how this looks, but I respectfully request that you look at the floorboard of my wife's SUV. You'll find an acceptance letter to a state STEM academy for my son. We don't live in this neighborhood. My family was driving home from a celebratory dinner. Your officer initiated a traffic stop without probable cause. He escalated the situation by demanding ID from a minor passenger, dragged my son out of the car, and held him at gunpoint when my wife verbally protested an illegal search of the vehicle. Siam. Yeah. Lang's brow furrowed. He turned to Crow. You pulled a gun on the kid? Did you search the vehicle? He was acting suspiciously, Sarge. I smelled marijuana. Crow blurted out. My family doesn't smoke, Dominic countered smoothly. And you don't have to take my word for it. My wife's phone was on a live SOS call to my vehicle's Bluetooth system. The entire audio of the stop, including Officer Crow threatening to have Child Protective Services take my daughter because my wife stepped out of the car, is recorded. Lang's face hardened. He was a veteran of the force. He knew good cops, and he knew bad cops. He had been reviewing Crow's increasingly aggressive field reports for months, waiting for the man to cross a line that couldn't be ignored. Looking at the terrified black family, the aggressive positioning of Crow's cruiser, and the calm, articulate green beret in handcuffs, Lang knew exactly what had happened here. Get these cuffs off him, Lang snapped to the officer standing next to Dominic. Sarge, he rushed a police scene, the young officer protested. I said take them off, Lang roared. The officer quickly unlocked the cuffs. Dominic rubbed his wrists, nodding politely to Lang. Thank you, Sergeant. Lang walked over to Lena and Caleb. He crouched down slightly to be at eye level with the teenager who was still shaking uncontrollably. Son, you okay? Caleb looked at the sergeant, then up at his mother, and finally over at his father, who gave him a reassuring nod. He pulled me out of the car. I didn't do anything. Lang sighed, a heavy, tired sound. He stood up and turned his attention back to Crow. The anger in the watch commander's eyes was absolute. Crow, give me your weapon and your badge, Lang said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. What? Sarge, you can't be serious. He interfered. I will not ask you a second time, Lang interrupted, taking a step toward the disgraced officer. You profiled a family. You escalated a routine stop into a lethal force scenario without justification. You traumatized a mother and her children. You are a liability to this badge. And as of this exact second, you are relieved of duty pending an investigation by Internal Affairs. Weapon. Badge. Now. Crow's face flushed purple with humiliation and rage. His hands shook as he unclipped his gun belt, handing it over along with the gold shield pinned to his chest. Get in the back of my vehicle, Lang ordered. As Crow was escorted away, Dominic finally walked over to his family. The stoic, unyielding operator vanished, replaced instantly by the father. He dropped to his knees on the asphalt, wrapping his massive arms around Lena and Caleb, pulling them tightly against his chest. Lena buried her face in his neck, the dam finally breaking as she sobbed uncontrollably. Caleb clung to his father's shirt, the teenage facade of toughness entirely shattered. "I've got you," Dominic whispered, burying his face in his wife's hair, tears finally welling in his own eyes. "I'm right here. Nobody is going to hurt you." He stood up, keeping one arm securely around Lena, and walked to the back seat of the SUV. He opened the door. Leela was huddled in the corner, clutching her stuffed bear, her eyes wide with terror. "Hey, Ladybug," Dominic said softly, a warm, broken smile spreading across his face. Lila blinked, taking a second to process the man in the darkness. Then she launched herself out of the car and into his arms. "Daddy, you came home." "I came home, baby," Dominic said, kissing the top of her head. "I'm right here." Sergeant Lang approached them slowly, holding Caleb's trampled acceptance letter in his hand. He looked at the family, the weight of his uniform feeling heavier than it ever had before. "Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale," Lang said gently, "I cannot apologize enough for what happened here tonight. It does not reflect the values of this department. I am personally ensuring that Officer Crow is investigated to the fullest extent of the law." Dominic looked over his daughter's shoulder at the sergeant. The anger was still there, simmering just beneath the surface, but it was controlled. "An apology doesn't erase what my son felt when a gun was pointed at his chest, Sergeant," Dominic said, his voice quiet but firm. "My family survived tonight because I happened to be close by and because I know how to navigate an armed conflict. But what happens to the next kid, the one whose dad isn't a Green Beret?" Lang looked down at the asphalt, unable to meet Dominic's gaze. "I understand, and you have my word. I will be the first one to testify against him." He handed the crumpled STEM Academy envelope back to Caleb. "Congratulations on the robotics program, son. You earned it." Dominic nodded. "We're going home now, Sergeant. I'll be at the precinct tomorrow morning with my lawyer to file a formal complaint, provide the audio recordings, and speak with the State Bureau of Investigation." "We'll be ready for you, Master Sergeant," Lang said respectfully, stepping back to clear their path. "Have a safe drive home." Dominic loaded his family into his massive pickup truck, leaving the new SUV safely locked on the shoulder for the police to tow back to their house. As he pulled away from the flashing lights and the shattered remnants of the night, Lena reached across the center console, weaving her fingers tightly through his. "You're really home," she whispered. Dominic looked at his wife, then glanced in the rearview mirror at his two children, safe in the back seat. The war he had been fighting overseas was over. But as he drove through the dark, quiet streets of his own country, he knew a different kind of battle had just begun. "Yeah," Dominic said softly, his grip tightening on her hand. "I'm home, and I'm not going anywhere." The sun rose over the city, painting the morning sky in bruised hues of purple and gold, but the shadows of the previous night lingered heavy in the Harper household. Nobody had slept. Lena had spent the dawn sitting on the edge of Caleb's bed, her hand resting on her son's back as he stared blankly at the wall. Dominic had spent the hours at the kitchen table, the glowing screen of his laptop illuminating his hardened features as he organized the digital audio files and contacted the one man he knew could handle the impending storm. By morning, Dominic and Lena walked through the heavy glass doors of the Crestview Hills Police Department. They were not alone. Flanking them was attorney Silas Reed, a heavyweight civil rights attorney who had cut his teeth fighting misconduct cases. Reed was a tall, imposing figure in a charcoal bespoke suit, carrying a leather briefcase that felt like a loaded weapon. They were ushered into a sterile, windowless conference room. Sergeant Lang was already there, looking older and more exhausted in the harsh fluorescent light. Beside him sat two detectives from the State Bureau of Investigation and a man in a tight gray suit who introduced himself as the police union representative, Victor Langford. "Let's make this quick," Langford started, crossing his arms and leaning back in his chair with a practiced look of bored defiance. "Officer Crow has an unblemished record. He was operating under reasonable suspicion in a high-crime area. We are prepared to argue that the minor was non-compliant and that Master Sergeant Hale here escalated the situation by aggressively breaching a secured perimeter." Reed didn't sit down. He unclasped his briefcase, placing a small Bluetooth speaker in the center of the mahogany table. "An unblemished record, Mr. Langford?" Reed asked, his voice smooth but laced with razor-sharp intent. Is that what you call a history of aggressive profiling? Because my office spent the last several hours pulling public court dockets. Officer Crow has had multiple excessive force complaints quietly settled out of court in recent years. But I suppose you were hoping we wouldn't look into that. Langford scowled. Those were unsubstantiated claims. Furthermore, Officer Crow's body camera malfunctioned during the initial approach. It's a known glitch with the new models. So unless you have definitive proof that my client acted outside the bounds of his constitutional authority, this is a he-said-she-said scenario, and the law sides with the badge. Dominic's eyes locked onto Langford. The cold, predatory stillness from the night before returned to the Green Beret's posture. There was no malfunction, Dominic said quietly, his voice cutting through the room's tension. He turned it off. He wanted to operate in the dark, but he forgot that a predator isn't the only thing that can listen in the dark. Dominic nodded to Reed. The attorney pressed a button on his tablet. The small speaker on the table crackled to life, and the sterile conference room was suddenly filled with the nightmarish reality of the traffic stop. The audio was pristine. It didn't just capture words, it captured the terror. The SBI detectives shifted uncomfortably as they heard Crow's aggressive, gravelly voice demanding Caleb step out of the car. They heard the violent scuffle of the teenager being thrown against the SUV. Take another step, boy, and I'll drop you right here. Get on the ground. Face down now. Lena closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks as the phantom sound of her daughter's hysterical screaming filled the room. Dominic reached out, taking his wife's hand and squeezing it firmly. When the audio finally concluded with Dominic's arrival, the silence in the conference room was absolute and suffocating. The union representative, Langford, had turned completely pale, his previous arrogance entirely erased. He stared at the speaker as if it were a bomb that had just detonated. Sergeant Lang looked up, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might shatter. He looked directly at the SBI detectives. You have what you need. We do, the lead detective affirmed, standing up and closing his notepad. He turned to Dominic and Lena. Mr. and Mrs. Hale, on behalf of the State Bureau of Investigation, I am deeply sorry for what your family endured. We are taking over this case immediately. We will be pursuing felony charges for aggravated assault under color of law, false imprisonment, and official oppression. Langford stood up quickly, raising his hands. Now hold on, let's not rush to— Save it, Victor, Lang interrupted, his voice dripping with disgust. Crow is done. And if the union tries to drag this family through the mud to protect a criminal in a uniform, I will personally take the stand and testify to everything I saw when I arrived on that scene. You tell Crow to get a good lawyer. He's going to need it. The wheels of justice are notoriously slow, but when greased by indisputable digital evidence, public outrage, and the unyielding pressure of a decorated Green Beret, they can turn with staggering speed. Within days, the audio recording had been strategically leaked to the press by Reed's office. It became a national firestorm. The contrast between the terrified innocence of the Harper family and the tyrannical aggression of Officer Crow struck a collective nerve across the country. The twists didn't stop at the indictment. During the discovery phase of the trial, an internal whistleblower at the Crestview Hills precinct stepped forward. Inspired by Sergeant Lang's uncompromising stance, the whistleblower leaked a trove of emails, proving that the precinct's former leadership had actively encouraged the targeting of minorities driving through the affluent suburb. The revelation triggered a massive federal civil rights probe by the Department of Justice. The precinct was entirely overhauled. Months later, Dominic and Lena sat in the polished wooden pews of the federal courthouse. They watched as Harlan Crow, now stripped of his uniform and wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, stood before the judge. He looked small, his previous swagger replaced by the hollow, sunken realization of his own ruin. The judge didn't mince words, citing the severe breach of public trust and the psychological trauma inflicted upon a minor. The judge sentenced Crow to 12 years in a federal penitentiary, without the possibility of early parole. As the gavel fell, an echoing crack that finalized the nightmare, Dominic exhaled a breath it felt like he had been holding for months. He looked at Lena, a quiet, tearful smile passing between them. They had won. They had protected their family. But true victory wasn't found in a courtroom. It was found in the resilience of their home. Summer arrived with the blistering heat and vibrant energy, characteristic of a new beginning. On a bright Saturday morning, Dominic pulled his massive black pickup truck up to the sprawling, ivy-covered campus of the State University STEM Institute. In the passenger seat, Caleb unbuckled his seatbelt. He had grown taller over the past year, his shoulders broader, his posture straighter. The trauma of that night had scarred him, but with the support of his family and intensive therapy, the scar had become a testament to his survival rather than a symbol of his defeat. Caleb reached into the back seat, grabbing a complex, heavily modified robotic arm he had spent weeks building in their garage. "You got everything, Caleb?" Dominic asked, putting the truck in park. "Yeah, Dad. I got it," Caleb said, smiling as he adjusted his grip on the machinery. Dominic reached over, placing a heavy, reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "I am so incredibly proud of you. Don't let anyone ever make you feel like you don't belong in these rooms. You earned this." Caleb nodded, his eyes bright with determination. "I know. Thanks, Dad." Dominic watched as his son walked across the sunlit campus, joining a group of diverse, brilliant young minds who were eagerly examining his robotic creation. Caleb was exactly where he was supposed to be. Dominic smiled, shifting the truck into drive. He had officially transitioned out of active duty, taking a position as a tactical consultant and instructor for law enforcement de-escalation training. He was using his combat experience not to wage war, but to teach officers how to manage their fear, how to read real threats, and how to protect the communities they were sworn to serve. He drove back towards the city, the radio playing softly, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The darkness of that isolated suburban road was finally behind them. The Harper family had faced the absolute worst of society, a predator cloaked in authority, and they had not broken. They had stood their ground. They had fought back with the truth. And they had walked out into the light, stronger, united, and completely unbreakable. The Harper family's harrowing journey is a powerful reminder that justice isn't just handed to us. Sometimes it must be demanded by those brave enough to stand in the light and expose the dark. It shows us the unbreakable bond of family, the crucial importance of accountability, and the incredible courage it takes to heal after trauma. If this real-life drama moved you, and you believe in standing up against injustice, please hit that like button, share this story with your friends and family to spread awareness, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories of resilience, truth, and triumph.